Hello everyone, this is update for May 11, 2023. Also catch up for May 10, day 442 of the war, end of the date update. As I promised, I'm going to focus a little bit more today on economic situation around the world. This is obviously the most important sort of strategic uh, update and something that really affects the whole sort of well-being of everyone. I will provide updates, a meaningful update on the situation on the front line, but in the second half of the video. So let's first start with what's going on in the U.S. financial system, in the U.S. banking system. Let's put it this way. This chart kind of shows what's going on here. So as you can see, the stress remains elevated. It's subsided a little bit as of May 10. So you can see this is sort of aggregate measurement of the stress. This line, I call it synthetic, which is essentially summation of the primary credit, which is blue, then bank term funding program, and then other credits. So essentially, this is all those three, and that's what we have. So because that's really matters cumulatively for all of these three groups, because this lending is sort of switched between the buckets, and then you're really getting confused. So really, this helps to understand what's really happening. And then FX, as you can see, there is no stress in the international markets in terms of strong demand for US dollars. It was just jump at the end of March, as you can see here, and then it all that stress went down. Also, if you look at the interest rate, it sort of supports what I'm saying. It's at 4.71. Last time I shown 4.7, so it's not terribly. It didn't go up much. So stress remains there, and it doesn't go away. For now, there is sort of, call it a small remission in this situation. But as I said before, as long as interest rates stay where they are, this will lead to more problems down the road. It's not going to happen, in in a day or in a week, not even in the months. But this is sort of medium-term problem, and there will be more banks that will have problems, let's put it this way, and go bankrupt as a result of this. Now let's actually switch a little bit to the economic situation, and the most important number that really defines well-being, sort of financial. Oh well, I wouldn't even say financial. It's the standard of living of everyone. That's probably the best way to describe it. And that's productivity. And as you can see in the US, it went down 2.7% quarter on quarter, but year on year, it went down 0.9%. And this is just how bad it is. It's the first time ever since 1948. And the time series for productivity in US they started in 1948. So basically, it's never been recorded so bad. Probably something like this was happening during the Great Depression in the US, but obviously at that time they did not track those numbers. But it just kind of gives you an idea how terrible the situation is. And this number, if let's say the only number that would help us to understand what's going on with our life, or like sort of with our standard of living, with economy, then productivity is the number that you really want to look at, because it's in a way, when productivity goes back, goes down, all that really means that we're going back closer to feudal ages, to slavery. So we sort of one step closer to those sort of dark times, and that's really what this means. Everybody will feel this, not on the US, because it's a global phenomenon. Everybody will feel that on themselves, and as you can see, this is how actually it translates into US unit labor costs. So as you can see, it went up, and this is component 2.7, as you can see, and 0.9 what increases unit labor costs, right? Because productivity down, the costs are going up. That's just, they are inverse. And so, as you can see, this is what will drive also uh, make inflation in US persistent, right? So it's turning not to into so much commodity inflation as it's turning into inflation that's driven by the loss of productivity. And that is the most difficult and the most um, dangerous type of inflation, because it's really driven. All goes back to this, what I mentioned before, the fight on energy, on conventional energy, and this translate. This is the sort of net cumulative result of all of those actions that's being done. It's basically legislative or sort of regulatory action. That this is the, I would say, evaluation of regulatory action. In this case, specifically in the U.S., well, something similar is happening. Not similar, actually, probably something worse it's happening in Europe. I just didn't get the numbers, but essentially, this is your, you know, extremely negative failure from regulatory perspective in the U.S., because you can see the number is the worst since 1948. That's your, uh, you know, the final grade. Let's put this way, and so and then that translates into U.S. real hourly compensation, which is, as you can see, is down, right? And it's down 1% year on year. And this is also translates in the U.S. It hasn't translated into mass sort of social unrest yet. There were some small kind of flames, but they still very much under control. But if this continues, this will translate into eventually large scale social unrest in the US. And we see much more of that in Europe, and you will see why. So if DE stands for Germany, Deutschland, right? So as you can see, real earnings, so basically the similar, basically equivalent to US real hourly compensation. So real earnings in Germany, this is for annual numbers. So in 22 versus 21 went down full 4%. So it's even much worse than in the US, as you can see. So the standard of living is going down much faster in Europe, which is again very logical. The war on conventional energy is sort of much more acute in Europe, and so you have much worse results as a result. And you see much more social unrest and all sort of protests in Europe. You know, I don't want to bring France, but there was in UK. I remember there's even Germany, and this is, if this is not changed, this basically all of this failed uh, policies will lead to collapse of the collapse of the West. Let's put this way, in very simple, in very straightforward way. And then to kind of paint even sort of uglier picture is, you can see then in Germany, new manufacturing orders were down 10.7% months and months, and it's also the same kind of formation on the year. So this is kind of like a heart attack in the manufacturing sector of German economy. And as you can imagine, manufacturing is a key driver of wealth and standard of living in Germany. It's a key driver, and it's a key driver, and Germany is a key driver of Europe, of continental Europe. So this is again tells us that the situation is pretty bad in Germany, and probably will get worse, because new orders is a leading indicator. So this is what's going to happen in next couple months, is you have fewer orders. You produce less. This will sort of trickle down to everyone, to everything and everywhere. It just this is kind of like, you on Titanic, music still sort of playing on the top, but the bottom is already, the water is coming into the bottom of it. And then some numbers that sort of support that is decline in export in March, and in import. But this is months on months, year on year. They seem to be somewhat more or less in line. But at the same time, it's also the export and import. They are not seasonal, so they should be more or less steady. So again, this is all, and this is a little bit already kind of like lagging indicator because it's what's already being produced and actually already left Germany. So this is kind of like we're still looking at the tail of the situation. So we don't see the whole sort of problem with that. So this is we looked at this sort of economic situation, U.S. and Germany is sort of proxy for Europe. Let's put this way. And now let's look at China, because if you really think it's like one big system, interconnected, US, China, and then Germany, Europe. And as I said, Germany is a proxy for Europe because it's just easier. The data is, I'd say, more available, like more easily available, at least for me, for Germany than the entire European Union. And so the way it works, the system is very sort of somewhat, if you make it primitive, the system is the following: U.S. is consuming, giving money to China. China is manufacturing consumer goods, and then Germany is manufacturing. How to say? Don't know how to say it in English, but basically machines, right, to manufacture consumer goods. So which Germany supplies to China, right, and then sort of this whole, and then the money flows in sort of in opposite direction, right. China gets money from the U.S. and then it sends some of its money to Germany for the machines and so on. And at the same time, the situation, something similar is going on with Japan, South Korea, and so on. So this is, I'm just sort of primitivizing it to make it more simple and clear. But let's look at what's going on in China, which also released a couple days ago its numbers for export and import. And as you can imagine, it's important for China because it's really export driven economy, or at least where China derives its wealth as a country, because then it's trying to blow this real estate bubbles and consumer finance bubbles in China, and they blowing up as we speak, and they in total disaster. So really, something that really works in China is this manufacturing, export, import, and that's how China created its wealth. That's where it's getting its capital, and so that's really what's important in China, because the rest of it is just net negative for China. All of that real estate bubbles and so on. So as you can see, the total is actually, just want to show, and this is numbers for April, cumulative. So basically, it's April year to date. So it's January through April of 2023. So as you can see, exports still went up 2.5% for the total, and then import went down 7.3%. So, which is in a way, from sort of purely mercantilistic approach, it's really great for China because it's exporting. It's basically deriving more revenue, paying like having lower expenses. So your net income, or this is your difference is larger. So you're accumulating more capital, more wealth, essentially. So in a way, China continues to kind of like suck wealth from their entire world, and the process is still working. At the same time, is if you look at like sort of West versus the rest of the world, so you can see that this trade is with the West is falling apart, and very quickly there's very quick decoupling happening. So if we look at US, you see that export to US is down quite significantly. Import is down very little, and the reason for that is because basically US doesn't produce anything, so China doesn't import pretty much anything from US. There's nothing sort of useful there. So that's the reason that import went down only 2%, because there is not much to lose there, sort of say. But the more important here is export is significantly down. The one thing, and probably that's something that's uh, I guess there is a misconception that really U.S. is the only biggest sort of contributor to China's export, Chinese wealth. As you can see, actually U.S. is roughly number three. So the first one is actually being where is it? ASEAN. This is ASEAN countries, and then EU. So U.S. is roughly third in sort of in importance to China, but certainly it is important. But it's not, it's not kill. It's not going to kill China. It's going to be, very difficult to lose U.S. because it's very lucrative market and probably most profitable. That's probably the important part of the U.S. is it's very profitable. So this is now let's look at EU. So separation here or decoupling is much milder. So the export went down only 4.3%, especially if you compare it to US, where it's just very how to say it's pretty much pretty quick, pretty steep decline. So in Europe it's much milder, and imports went down also very little. And the reason for that is China really needs Europe, and so it cannot afford not to import from Europe because it's importing important machines to then continue to build for its factories. So that's why. So while in the US, in case of US, there's simply nothing to lose because there's nothing to import. In Europe, they cannot afford to lose Europe because that's something where China still has big gaps in terms of machines for their manufacturing facilities, and that's why Europe is super important, and that's why you can see that China is trying to sort of build sort of separation between the U.S. and Europe, so that Europe doesn't support all of this sanctions against China. That's US is sort of spearheading and driving, right? So that's why China is trying to kind of like convince Europe to stay out of it, which I doubt is going to happen, but we'll see. Then out of Europe, the situation in with Germany is actually much worse, as you can see, relative to Europe. There actually a reason for that is not sure why. The France had good time, I think, exporting to China. I don't really know the reason for that. I'm not sure what's going on there, but that was sort of what skewed this whole EU results in a sort of positive way. That it doesn't look as bad. But if you look at the Germany, so German export is down. Sorry, Chinese export is down quite more to Germany significantly, and then import as well, which is again Germany is sending or selling machines for factories to China. So this is actually, uh, you know, might be quite negative for China that it's importing so much less from Germany. And this is actually, if we go look at these numbers, right? So this is sort of back, looking sort of at the tail, as I said, or lagging indicators, export and import. But this new manufacturing is, somewhat related to this, to the this import number, which is down, as you can see here. And so this all corroborates what we're seeing here, but between these numbers, that things probably in April, when basically German numbers are kind of like much behind relative to Chinese numbers, like at least months behind. So once they're gonna get released, probably beginning of June, they probably gonna look pretty bad as well for Germany. So I'm talking about these numbers, export, import, and so on. And then with Taiwan is very very clear. This is total sort of separation. It's very clear indication that things are going towards conflict. As you can see, this is where it really screams at you that things are going into the conflict with Taiwan here. And then the rest of sort of call it West, as you can see, China is importing less from Japan and South Korea, and by the way, South Korea is also pretty terrible numbers, and it's all related to the semiconductors. We'll look into that a little bit after this. The only place where the China is still doing okay in the West is Australia, because if you look at Canada, UK, it's somewhat similar picture to the rest of the West, so there is not much of a difference. I didn't show it. And then I just wanted to contrast sort of the rest of the world, sort of non-West. And as you can see, the rest of the world is continuing doing business with China without any problems. So China is exporting quite a bit more to ASEAN countries, and that's the biggest sort of trade partner for China. Then it's doing okay in Latin America, as you can see. It's growing there, and it's actually not that terribly small. So you can almost say that whole Latin America is kind of like half of the US in importance for China. And then in Africa, you can see the huge jump in export to Africa. So, and then obviously Russia and China, this is again screaming sign of the alliance, right? So even rhetoric, Chinese rhetoric, may be that we're not supporting Russia, or we're not in the same boat with Russia, but sort of like economy, money, finance speaks much louder, right? So that's a real sort of action, real words, and the rest of this diplomatic talk is, as I say, cheap. But that's really what tells you what's really happening there. And then a little bit last sort of look at what's going on with the semiconductors and so on, and all of this high tech stuff. So I just looked at these numbers for IC stands for integrated circuits. So this is called like proxy for semiconductors and high tech products. It's probably already manufactured sort of technology products that obviously use ICs, integrated circuits, or semiconductors, whichever way you call it. But as you can see, the import of integrated circuits, which is the component to manufacture high-tech products, is dropping significantly, and it's sort of similar numbers to what you see drop in imports from South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, because those are main sources of this sort of imports to China, right? So there is this, drop in or restrictions on the supply of semiconductors to China starting to play out. It's driven by the U.S., but it's actually executed through Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And so you see these numbers here. At the same time, also China is importing less like ready-made high-tech products. Not sure, but sort of what's the driver there. And then in terms of exports, it's also turning into export situation where China is also exporting less semiconductors out to the world. And here, in terms of sort of, if you look at the quality, this is more high quality semiconductors that it's importing, and it's exporting sort of lower quality, more primitive semiconductors out to the world, but they cheap, right? Cheap primitive semiconductors out to the world, and it's exporting less of it. Also, Chinese exports of ready-made technology products is also declining quite a bit, as you can see. So not everything is good for China, but overall it's still able to maintain this its export-driven economy. As you can see, export is still up. Import is actually, if you really look, the numbers actually even like getting better on surface. The only negative here is actually this net, where the total value is going down, but at the same time, you really, if you really look at this, it may not be even, it might be, it's fine or even positive, because you really don't care about your revenue just per se. You really care about your net income, which is revenue minus expenses, which is export is revenue and import is expenses. So that's you really care to you work to earn money. You're not working simply. If you translate this in more sort of simple way to explain, is like you working to earn money. You're not working for the sake of working, right? And from that perspective, everything is going very well for China, at least for now. But there's obviously clouds on the horizon here, with especially US. As you can see, somewhat with Europe is another place, but this is sort of somewhat balanced by the rest of the world. Um, so now let's switch a little bit to Ukraine. So just want to provide some update. Ukraine is getting this Storm Shadow missiles from the UK. UK decided to be sort of leader in terms of providing, I'd say, not long distance, but sort of medium distance missiles, because so far most Ukraine got was this HIMARS missiles, which I think like 70 kilometers or 80 kilometers range. And they use GPS, which is being spoofed by uh, uh, Russian radio electronic systems. So effectively, the effectiveness went down tremendously, and this is really just because they are fairly primitive rockets in the first place. There was a lot of, call it, hype over HIMARS, and obviously Russian side was sort of not prepared. So there was sort of initial success, but at this point the effectiveness and efficiency went down tremendously, and they are no longer inflicting as much damage as they used to have on the Russian side, and sort of contributing to strategic successes on the front line. So now the UK decided to step up and sending this medium range rockets to Ukraine, while the US declined to do so. So this is obviously uh, big help for Ukraine. The reason I'm saying it's medium range is because it's Ukraine is going to be supplied with export version of it, which is the range is limited to only 250 kilometers. The sort of original version has actually a range of 560 kilometer, which is I would say would be excellent, would be perfect for Ukraine. The launching sort of tool will be tactical bomber Su-24, which is old airplane, outdated. Russia has actually Su-34 in service, which much more modern, but nevertheless, Ukraine has some Su-24, which are going to be used to launch this rockets. In terms of the rocket itself, it's actually a really excellent rocket, I would say. I would say much better than what I've seen so far. First of all, it has pretty big payload, 450 kilograms of explosive, which obviously gonna do. If it hits, it does enough damage. The speed is slightly under 1,000 kilometers, which is kind of okay. And then the most important part of it is the guidance system, and that's what makes it so much better than the anything Ukraine has, and I would say one of the better rockets out there. So first of all, it uses several uh, systems for redundancy and for better results. And it relies on inertial guidance system, which is you cannot spoof it with any radio electronic um, systems. So it's essentially you cannot do much about it. And then it's complemented with the terrain profile matching. So basically, you take the um, let's say you have the map of the terrain, right, of the profile, and as the rocket is flying over sort of the ground, it sort of understands where it is. the distance to the ground, the sort of profile of the ground. An inertial system helps. So basically, you kind of like using that to compensate your errors in inertial system. So it's almost like a perfect system to have very precise hit and not being able to be affected by external forces, as I said, by the Russian radio electronic warfare systems. Because GPS, and there is obviously GPS here, because GPS is completely inferior. It's not a solution. It's a for the war. It's a bad idea. It doesn't work. It can be easily spoofed and so on. So this is, I would say, very well engineered. There's very great thinking, and then on top of it, at the terminal stages, once it arrives to the target, it has also thermal imaging to help it. So you have like a three at the final stage of the rocket. You have like uh, three systems that really help it. That really like really great systems. And I'm not even talking about GPS because, as I said, GPS is a terrible idea for the war. I'm not talking about generally. Like it's a great thing for consumer use and so on, but for war, it's not appropriate. And so it's excellent. We'll see what happens in terms of applications, but the potential here is tremendous. The problem is obviously this 250 kilometers, which is, if we really look at the map, because what Ukraine can use it against is obviously this Crimean bridge. And the problem is the distance from where the front line is right now to Crimean bridge is about slightly more than 250 kilometers. So, in other words, Ukrainian airplanes will have to fly into Russian sort of physical territory, and that almost guarantees that they will be shot down. Even approaching about 100 kilometers before the front line on Ukrainian side, they effectively would have, and that's why the air force on both sides is essentially not working. They cannot come closer than essentially for the airplanes at least 100 kilometers. It's already pretty dangerous zone. It's more like safer for the most of them to be at least like 150 to 200 kilometers inside of the front line, basically, right? So if you let's say the medium sort of danger zone is 100 kilometers, so then you know 250 minus 100, you only have 150, and that really greatly limits ability to use it. So really, Ukrainian troops need to get first to the Azov Sea to be able to sort of seal the pocket around Crimea. So in other words, it's a great, excellent tool. The only problem is this 200 limitation of 250 kilometers. Really creates quite a bit of problems because otherwise it turns this Su-25, Su-24 pilots into basically kamikaze pilots because they know that they fly there, they're going to get destroyed, and they fly there just to be able to launch the rocket towards Russian target. And you know, obviously that's not how you want to do it. So this is about this rocket. It could be significant. We'll see. Obviously there won't be too many. If you look at the price for it, it's roughly 1.5 million US dollars. It's not cheap. You don't use it for just whatever random target. You really use it very carefully. As I said, like Crimean bridge would be perfect target for it. Something similar to that. That's what you use it. You don't really use it against sort of even sort of large accumulation of the Russian. Let's say you don't shoot at 3, 4, 5 tanks with this rocket. That's not what you do with these rockets. And now let's switch to the situation on the battleground in Ukraine. There is quite a bit of hysteria among Russian war reporters or propaganda reporters. They already claiming that Ukrainian offensive has started. It has not started yet. It can start like on the 12th. It can start on 13th. I would say starting from the 15th and onward, the chances are extremely high. As I said, Ukrainian president said that so far formally they have not started. He actually wants to delay it to accumulate more equipment and so on. Potentially might be a good idea. I think this is the first time I would say I would agree with Ukrainian president because the time for the window of opportunity I think is lost largely. Given what you basically, if you compare uh, the training of the troops or the organizational system of Ukrainian army plus technological advantage, it's just simply not there to have really decisive result. So from that perspective, that's probably fair. It's better uh, to get more technological advantage because, as I said before, organizational advantage Ukrainian army will not get because it really means that the Ukrainian political top needs to be changed. Otherwise, they will prevent any meaningful changes in they're actually preventing meaningful changes in the society and in the military because the military is really the mirror of the society in a way. So as long as we have Ukraine has this political system, it will prevent changes. But as I said, Ukraine is heading towards 1917 moment. It's just not clear who gets there first, Russia or Ukraine. But going back to this whole offensive, it hasn't really started. And But what really has started is crumbling of the Russian front line around Bahmut. And once we get there, I'll discuss that in detail. But otherwise, as I said, um, there is no like that sort of announced offensive hasn't started yet. In other news, Ukrainian president is planning to go, I believe, to Italy on the 13th. So again, it gives you another clue that offensive is not going to start till at least 15th. The other clue that in support of the offensive is that the Ukrainian head of the staff has disappeared from doesn't show publicly anymore, and the head of the Ukrainian land force is also is off the radar screens. So they're probably somewhere close to the front line with the troops, and that's obviously in support of that offensive is happening sooner than later. Let's put this way. I just don't think it's going to happen before the 15th, and then the probability is extremely high in high 90s. Let's put this way. So now let's actually do walks through the front line. As I always do, gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border remains the same. Extensive, adversarial activities from both sides. No reduction in hostilities here. Now let's jump to the North Luhansk front line. Things here are quiet. As I said before, this turned into quiet front line from strategic reason. It's sort of strategic, kind of like dead end for both sides, and so there's no. So this creates balance here. Basically, there's never ending fights in this forest, but this is just a tactical fights. They really nothing major from strategic perspective. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. So what happens is Ukrainian troops continuing their attacks, and actually look at this map because it's a little bit better. So what's happening is that Wagner mercenaries they are continuing their frontal squeeze of Ukrainian troops in the very western part of Bahmut, and they do this at let's say snail pace. I guess that's probably the best way to describe. And that's the only. So basically, Wagner mercenaries were their front line is essentially reduced to this short section of Bahmut itself. Because, as I said before, they are depleted. They out of the resources, specifically out of the soldiers, out of the mercenaries. So they cannot, they don't they Russian regular Russian troops are sort of here on the sides, on the flanks, and as you can see, Ukrainian military is attacking slightly north of Bakhmut, and then here sort of southwest of Ivanivsky, essentially. So actually, let's look at what happened, like from a big picture. So in the prior video, I showed you that Ukrainian troops basically cleared Russian bridgehead that was captured by Wagner mercenaries a while ago, and that was, important victory and important sort of loss for the Russian side, because it actually it drives Russian troops behind this freshwater channel, which again, doing again, establishing bridgehead will be costly at this point there. And it was launching pad for continuing Russian attacks towards Konstantinivka and Slavyansk. So this really kills a very important opportunity for the Russian side, and that's what happened. And then Ukrainian troops now attacking straight north of Bakhmut, and as you can see, kind of like south of Bakhmut, but really, I guess, southwest of Bakhmut. The if I would say describe what's happening here, this is again the same primitive approach that Russian troops are doing right now, where Wagner mercenaries like squeezing Ukrainian troops in a frontal manner, which is the most unintelligent way to do things, and the same is happening on the Ukrainian side. The most unintelligent thing to do is doing this frontal squeeze straight, north of Bakhmut and sort of straight south of Bakhmut. So this again kind of highlights lack of skill set at the top level command on Ukrainian side. Also, to extent shows that same for the Russian side, but at least you can sort of forgive the head of the Wagner mercenaries. He's not trained military. He's really entrepreneur, right, in his nature. So he's just how to say, doing his creative things, let's put it this way. He hasn't arrived at the level of that, how to say, military wise, he doesn't have that sort of gift, let's put it this way. He's more entrepreneur than anything. And so again, you can see that both sides is kind of like weak in terms of, call it, brain power of how to do this. And as I said, this is really pretty much perfect Stalingrad situation. This is like November 1942, where the German troops were completely exhausted. Their assault potential was close to zero, and the reserves, they were low on reserves, so out of reserves, and the flanks were exposed. And this is exactly the same what's going on here. The thrust, or the penetrating power of Russian side, which is Wagner mercenaries, reduced close to zero, completely depleted. The flanks are covered by regular Russian troops that are of, I would say, inferior quality. And so this is excellent opportunity for really attacks on the flanks. And by that I mean is attacking, somewhere where I'm showing, in from the south and north, and making really basically encircling all of these Russian troops in Bakhmut, and basically retaking including Soledar and so on, and sort of creating opportunity to actually go east and liberate Popasna and so on after destroying encircled troops. And by the way, on the um, another important here is that before I said that airborne troops are on the side, on the flanks, or sort of up and north of Wagner mercenaries. So it looks like it's actually regular Russian troops. As you can see, there is a 4th Mechanized Brigade, 72nd, and then 18th Divisions. They're not anything. They basically on a lower quality. Let's put this way. In Russian, if you kind of rank uh, different Russian sort of branches of Russian military, and Wagner being, let's if you assume that Wagner mercenaries are obviously branch of Russian military as well. So as you can see, there is a perfect opportunity, but instead of doing that, there is just this, frontal squeeze trying to kind of like make the passage towards this western Bahmut a little bit better. Again, very primitive thinking, and again, waste of resources from big picture perspective relative to what needs to be done for Ukrainian side. But again, this is only possible. Why this is happening is because, again, Russian side is becoming short on the manpower on the front lines and equipment. So this is very similar situation to what's been going on when this Izium or Kharkiv/Izium offensive started. I think it was in September of 2022, where basically the Russian front line was thinly manned because everything was lost and wasted in this attack south of Izium, which basically all of the troops were burned there, and there was nobody to defend the front line. So this is kind of very, again, similar replay, except Wagner mercenaries is being those troops that were south of Izium. They were burnt pretty much to zero, so they reduced to only Bahmut. There is up and north nothing there, and they are thinly manned by, and also by poor quality troops. So this is a perfect combination for Ukrainian side, and doesn't seem like it's being exploited properly. So going back, it's exactly the same replay of what being going on in September around this Izium and Kharkiv. So in other words, it's not sort of, let's say, operational success or sort of success in terms of command of Ukrainian troops, but it's simply Ukrainian side exchanged a lot of Ukrainian lives for Wagner mercenaries lives, and now Russia really doesn't have enough troops to plug the hole. And so this creates obviously opportunity for Ukrainian side. So the front line, Russian front line, starts to crumble even at the push of the same troops that were defending here. Like specifically, as you can see, the main attack is being done by this 3rd Brigade, which is Azov, or it's basically effectively, call it like some derivative of Azov. Let's put this way. And then also probably 93rd, 92nd. There's actually units of 92nd Brigade here as well, some battalion or something. So, which is 93rd is also relatively better brigade within the Ukrainian army. So again, so this is just sort of regular frontline Ukrainian troops are pushing back against Russians, and simply because they don't have enough resources to defend, they're crumbling. So we may see much more here. We don't know yet. Really depends on what Russian side has in its back pocket. But if there is no more reserves coming to this front line here, this squeeze will probably continue and even accelerate. But really depends on the reaction of the Russian top military command if they want to throw any reserves in this area, which they probably will, because otherwise it will be the whole situation will look terribly embarrassing for the Russian military top, given especially their fight with the head of the Wagner mercenaries, who essentially attacks Russian military top essentially every day at this point. Um, so again, this is where this is not a major offensive. This is more like a tactical situation for this section of the front line, where opportunities are open for Ukrainian side to take advantage of them. We'll see if that's going to happen to the full extent, beyond just really small tactical initial successes that were achieved um, so far here. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here basically the same. Attacks in Marinka, attacks out of Pesky and essentially no changes here. This is basically stalemate, completely World War One in its worst sort of shape. Now let's finish with Zaporizhya front line. Things here are so far quiet, no more probing attacks. Obviously, everybody understands that that's where Ukrainian command is probably going to be looking or seeking for the sort of decisive victory or decisive result. And this is obviously expected by the Russian side. There's opportunity for surprise is not there anymore. Obviously, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.